everybody. Welcome to the first installment of Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck Profiles. This is a new thing for the channel because I've got back into Yu-Gi-Oh! And I've been playing at the locals here in Framingham and Endangered Hobbies in the Natick Mall. And yesterday I came in first place, undefeated, at a 33-person locals with branded Predaplant DPE. Not exactly your normal list. This is somewhat based off of Rev's cards, Therian branded Predaplant DPE list, though obviously missing the Therians. I'll discuss that a bit after the card choices, but to begin, let's start with the cards. We'll start with the Predaplant engine. We've got 3 Scorpio. Most people tend to run 1. I run 3 because we're running a much bigger Predaplant package in this, and this is your possible best starter. It's either between Scorpio or the next card on our list. It just gets you everything, and especially with some of the other monster choices in this list, the ability to get bricks out of your hand or get things that you want in your graveyard out of your hand can be really useful to you. Next up, we've got 3 Climate of Sundew. Again, this is in competition to be your best starter. This plus any Predaplant in your hand gets you to Ambulance, which gets you to whatever Predap card you need, which should get you into full combo. In addition, if you draw this later and you've gone through some Triantis or some Predaplanting combos and you've got some Predator counters, it's just Super Poly. Obviously without the Spell Speed 4, but Super Poly without Spell Speed 4 is still really useful, especially because it makes them dark, and so you don't run into the problem of, say, you're against Marin Cess and you can't make Starving Venom because they have no dark monsters. Well, with Climate of Sundew, you can. So great card, absolutely want 3 of it. 3 Biblisp, why wouldn't you? I mean, being able to draw your best card off of Biblisp, especially again with the discard cards we have, can be really useful. Normally in Climate of Sundew, using it to fuse with Biblisp from hand gets you 2 searches off Ambulance, which gets you Predapractice and maybe another Predaplant to go into the tribute plays with Ambulance. It's just good. The ability to bring itself back if you get a Predator on count or something, if you need a monster in a pinch to tribute with Ambulance, also incredible. It's just all around good, and we wouldn't want less than 3. The first of the questionable 3-ofs we have Buvalicula. I guess it's the only of the questionable 3-ofs in at least the Predaplant slot, but I'm not sure about 3. You definitely want at least 2, but 3 can be bricky, but it's just so useful to have a Polymerization on a stick that I can't find a good enough reason to cut it down to 2, especially because you just get random Pendulum summons with this and Triantis. Only 2 Triantis because it's not as useful on its own as Buvalicula is, but the combination of the 2 is nuts. You can just go Buvalicula, Triantis. If those are the only 2, that gets you into Ambula Melodies. Like, that alone it gets you a Predator counter on it, so you can make Biblisp plays. Gets you Triantis back in hand, and so you can add Predaprime fusion off of Ambula Melodies if you really have no other plays and still have the ability to go into Dracostapelia. Like, having 2 each of these is just good. Having the 3rd Buvalicula, I think, is especially good because if I draw one of these and a Biblisp, I can search the other one off of Biblisp to get into it. And you just randomly have 0 and 8 scales. Like, if you just go normal Scorpio, special Sundew, Ambulo Melodies to search out Saracenian or something like that, and you have the scales as well, you can just Pendulum summon the Saracenian, and it's just an extender. These 2 together is just a native extender. Incredible combo for the deck. 1 Saracenian, I don't think more than 1 is useful. It can be fine if you have 2, if you draw 1 and still would like to special it off of Scorpio or something, but I still don't see good enough reason to. The best reason I can think of to have 2 is if you've used 1 for your combo plays and then you want to add a second one off of a Predaplanting send so you can have a little bit of defense on the crackback if they break your board, but that doesn't come up anywhere near enough. If they've broken your board at that point, you almost deserve to lose, because with so much follow-up, I find it really difficult to believe a second Saracenian will be the difference between winning and losing at that point. Just 1, useful for searching out Predap cards, useful for tributing off Ambula Melodies, but beyond that, you don't really need more than 1. And you really don't need more than 1 of this. Like, bricking on it's hard, but bricking on it and having another one in your deck is just as hard. Like, you can work past not having Darlingtonia summon off of either Scorpio or Ambulo Melodies. Like, just the one is fine. But you need the one because, obviously, this searches out the rest of our fusion cards. So that's it for the monsters. Let's go into the spells and traps. We've got 3 Predapractice. Again, we're playing a much bigger Predaplant package. So 3 Predapractice. This is your best way of starting. If you have Predapractice Climito Sundew or Predapractice Scorpio, that's full combo. If you into the branded package, if you have Predapractice and a way to get to branded fusion, you get a DPE on top of it, which is just disgusting. So that's a 2-card full combo. I know it's ashable, but you have so many good ash targets in here that if they ash one thing, that frees up your other things just for free. So I don't mind having 3 and it getting ashed, especially because if they ash it, you can just normal what you were going to Predapractice if it's Sundew or Scorpio and just go off anyway. So 3 of this, absolutely worth it. Wouldn't do without it. Got 1 Predaprime fusion. I question whether we want 2, but so far I haven't found any situations where 2 of this over something else is useful enough. But I tend to grab this if I've got Ambulo Melodies and another Predaplant and another monster on field that I'm going into Cobra with. I prefer to grab Predaprime instead of Bufalicula because Predaprime lets you fuse in response to Valor on Darlingtonia Cobra. Like if you Ambulo Melodies to tribute one of your monsters, special Cobra, and they go, okay, I'm going to try and Valor your Cobra, Predaprime in response gets it off the field and into Dragostapelia, which you were going to do anyway, but still lets you get the fusion surge. So it's useful. I don't think it's useful enough to have more than 1, but if you've got reasons why you might do more than 1, let me know. I'm interested to hear. And then 1 Predaplanting. It's skill drain on a stick if you've got Dragostapelia out. It sends as cost, which is nuts. You send a Biblisp as cost, so at worst this is Rhoda for the archetype on a trap card, which is not great, but it's okay. And then if you fusion summon a dark monster while it's in your graveyard, you just get a free pop. Like, this is your out to Mystic Mine in the main deck. Like, if you're up against Sky Striker and they mine and they're just hitting you with Hayate, you can pop this. You can use this just to get it into the graveyard, get a counter on their stuff or something, and then use Predaprime Fusion or any number of your fusion spells just to get Mystic Mine off the board, and then you've got Predator counters on the board. You probably missed your search with Biblis because of Mine being on the field, but still, this is your out to Mine in the main deck, and it's heavily searchable. Like, I wouldn't not play this card. Again, don't think you need 2 or 3. Definitely not 3. The 1 is just fine because we're searching it out so much. All right, moving on to the branded package. We have 1 Owlbear, 2 opening, 3 fusion, 1 banishment. I don't think more than 1 Owlbear is correct. You don't need that much of a package. If we're going to be running 3 Owlbear, we want Tragedy and Ad Libitum, and we're just not. We're more of a Predaplant deck. I find the Predaplant extenders and follow-up to be, while not quite as consistent to the Despia cards, they have a higher ceiling, and my preference is such that I like the higher ceiling over the extra consistency. So we maxed out on the Predaplant cards rather than the branded cards. So we just run the 1 Owlbear. Branded opening, we're only running 2 because while you like to see it, you don't like to see it enough that you want 3. The discard to search, because we don't have Tragedy. We have Biblisp, which is good enough, but because you're going to be searching it out, discarding to search out Owlbear, and then usually if you're using branded opening, you're going into Lubellion. That's a minus most of the time because you have to pitch with Lubellion. There is a card I saw at locals yesterday that I might want to add, Stay Sailor Romani, I think it's called. If you use Stay Sailor Romani, you can go into Albion instead of Lubellion, but still get functionally the Biblisp search. So if you add Stay Sailor Romani and you don't like some of the inclusions, like you want to cut down to 2 Bufalicula or you want to cut down to 1 Triantis or something like that, you could add in the 3rd opening. That's really up to you. 3 Branded Fusion. I should not have to say why we're playing 3 Branded Fusion. I mean, if you are playing less than 3 Branded Fusion, why are you playing the branded deck? And then Banishment is our best thing to get off of a Mirror Jade Send Albion, because this is nuts. Dragostapelia is 8. Mirror Jade is 8. DPE is 8. So this just gets you back everything. This lets you play through Nibiru. I was playing against Speedroid yesterday, and he nibbed me on end board, which is DPE DPE Mirror Jade, Dragostapelia, and an Albion that I had left around. That's an interesting play. I'll go through that later. But after DPEing, I had an Albion in the grave. After Nibiruing, I use DPE to destroy it so it comes back next turn, and then I get an Albion, and I just set Branded Banishment, and I still have Predaplanting down. So I can Branded Banishment back the Dragostapelia, fuse if I need to, though I don't have to, and I've still got Predaplanting Dragostapelia on board with a Snow in grave, and a DPE coming back. You still have 3 to 4 interruptions with that. This lets you play through Nib. So I would not cut this. I didn't have it in the opening build of this, and I didn't do as well. I put it in, and it immediately saved the day every single time I played it. Do not cut this card. And then, of course, we're playing the bricks. Playing an Albaz. There's nothing to say about it. You got to play the Albaz. I don't think you play more than one. The only reason you would want to play more than one is if on your opener, you don't need to go into Lubellion, and so you go into Albion instead and banish your Albaz. So you can't, set Branded Fusion with Albion and do another Branded Fusion the next turn, but I feel like you don't need to do that much. Again, if you're in that situation where they break your board that heavily and your only follow-up is to set Branded Fusion instead of using Banishment, I don't think an extra Branded Fusion would help you in that instance. Again, my preference, if you want an extra... It has at least some functionality over other bricks like Darlingtonia. You normal summon it, this can... it can do something, but I don't find it useful enough to want more than one. Okay, moving into the last of our packages. Small package, Dasher, Celestial, 2FD. This one's questionable. A lot of people will just run branded Predaplant, and we are running 45, so you don't even need this in here. But again, I cut a little bit of consistency for the power of the extra package, and because we have just enough ways to get into the branded package without going into Darlingtonia, having Darlingtonia to grab FD is just so much follow-up. The recursive threat of DPE, the extra draws from Celestial, the special from Dasher can come up every now and then. And for only 4 cards, this seems useful enough to me to include. It seems very good. Especially if someone tries to mess with your DPE, you can get it back with Banishment, and you still have the recursive destruction. This is good. I really like this. And sometimes you just draw FD, and sometimes you go through your plays, you pretend you're going to FD, and they try and negate you with Ash or with Veiler or stuff like that, and you just drop an FD, and they're like, "Oh well, crap! I just used all my things." I'm like, "Yeah, you did." So I like FD. I don't like... This is where, on Rev's list, he would bring out the Therian package. I think that's one package too many. Branded goes into Predaplant really easy because you send Biblisp off of Branded Fusion. You can go into Branded or FD with Predaplant really easy because of Cobra. But the Therians, if you're using your normal on Lone Fire, you have to have Predapractice for one of your Predaplant starters. And because your Predaplant starters get you into the rest of your engines, the Therian engine does not play as well with this. Yeah, you can add Triantis off of Rosebell, but again, Triantis is not the one you want to see on its own. You want to see Bufalicula, and you can't add that with Triantis. So I tried it in the first build, and it just didn't do enough. I really don't think you need it. Again, that's sacrificing more consistency for more ceiling, but at that point, you've sacrificed too much consistency, and I just don't like it at that point. So no Therians in this build. Sorry, Revs, but that's just me. Now we're just going for the extra side support cards. The monsters, we just have 1 Snow. This card should not be legal. I won yesterday because the Speedroid player I was playing against broke my board and then ended on just Clearwing Synchro, I think, the one that negates effects that target a level 5 or higher Synchro. I snowed, he negated it. It destroys Snow, so then I just snowed again and set it and finished my board. This card should not be legal. I play the worst... matchups I've played against is Adventure Dragon Link, and every single time I won my match against him yesterday, but even then he almost kept bringing it back because he could just special Snow 3 or 4 times. I mean, this card should not be legal, but as long as it's legal, we're playing it. There's no reason not to. 3 Allure. This should be Pot of Prosperity, but I am poor and do not have $350 to spend on pots. So we run Allure. Allure is good enough. You have enough darks, and especially if you run some bricks that aren't doing... Especially if you open bricks and don't want to do anything with them and can't do anything with them. Allure at least lets you draw 2 cards. This is especially good because like Pot, what you want to be seeing going second is your board breakers, and this draws you into your board breakers. I can't think of the number of times yesterday where I allured and I drew into Super Poly, or I drew into Dark Ruler, or I drew into Lava Golem. It happened at least 3 or 4 times. Like, you need this consistency card in here. Allure is not the best one. That would be Pot of Prosperity, but it's the one that we can afford, and it's good enough. I would not cut this. And finally, 1 Instant Fusion. This card should not be at 3. Some people say it should be at 3. As soon as it's at 3, this deck is, I would say, if not tier 1, in the meta. Instant Fusion free Ambula Melodies, like, skips 3 or 4 steps of your combo. You want to be going Practice into Scorpio, add Biblisp, pitch Biblisp, summon Clemente Sundew into Ambulance. This just is 1 card, skip straight to Ambulance, then everything else is Extender. This card is nuts. You want to see it in your opener. You don't want to have to grab it off Cobra. If you have to grab it off Cobra, it's usually because you've opened Branded Fusion and FD, and so you have nothing to go into with Cobra. But if you're going into Instant Fusion with Cobra, like, that's still really good because this card is nuts. And then finally, we've got our defensive cards. I only run 7. I feel like the ratios are pretty off, but because of the consistency and because of the extension you have in this, you don't need as many defensive cards to be able to play through a board. Going first, you set up your own board. Going second, you try and break theirs. We don't run any hand traps in the main. I just don't think it does enough, especially with Power of the Elements coming out. It just doesn't do enough against Spright or Tear. Like, you cannot get by with an Ash or an Imperm, or even an Ash and an Imperm against those decks. You need to be able to get to it. Like, there's no way you can do it. So we run 3 Dark Ruler, 3 Super Poly, 1 Called By. The most suspect one here is Super Poly. Super Poly did work for me yesterday, but it's not the best. It should probably be Droplet, but again, I'm poor, and while Droplet did get a reprint, it's still $60 a pop, and I'm looking for them, but I haven't got them yet. But it does enough in my local meta. There's a ton of Dragon Link, there's a ton of Branded Despia. You were going to be summoning Starving Venom, Trifia Varudum out the wazoo. I beat a Dynamorphia player in 5 minutes because game 1 he goes Frenzy into Kentragina into Rexsturm after normaling Teresia, and in battle I just Super Poly for Trifia Varudum and he dies. Second game happened the same way. So, like, Super Poly is good enough for me in the local meta. This should probably be in the side, and Droplet should be in the main, but again, I'm poor, can't go for it. Okay, so that's the main deck. Let's go into the extra deck. I don't think any of these choices will really surprise anyone, except for maybe one, but that's because it's not the end card. I just haven't gotten the card that it's supposed to be yet. Okay, so first off, we have 2 Ambulo Melodies. This card is insane. It's not a powerhouse on its own. You never end on it, but it gets you everywhere. If you've got a stuffy hand, if you can make your way to Ambulo Melodies, you usually will just have full combo from there. This card is nuts. Again, instant fusion for it is like you're living in Cloud 9 at that point. If you can get to that point, you're winning. I don't think 3 is right. It never came up that I needed 3. It did come up enough for me to want 2. You could trim this down to 1, but you have to be super careful at that point. Like, if they break your board, you have not as much follow-up because you can't get into your card that searches you the rest of your deck. So 2 seems right to me. 2 Dragostapelia. I mean, it's an inboard piece. Not enough. Don't want enough to warrant 3. Love it enough to warrant 2. 1 is not quite enough. They can break Dragostapelia on its own, and then you can follow up with like a Super Poly or something, and then bring another Dragostapelia out. Not great, not terrible. It's warrants it enough to just warrant 2. 1 Starving Venom Fusion Dragon. Some people run 2. I think with Triff, pinned best deck. I think with Triff, you don't need 2 of these because if you're playing against a dark deck, they can just easily summon 3 as they can 2. And if you're playing against a deck that only has a couple of dark monsters and your first Super Poly is for Starving Venom, the second Super Poly is not going to do anything because they weren't summoning 3 ever. So I think 1 of these is fine. It's useful. It's good. It's a free monster. It doesn't do great things, but it does enough, and we need it for Super Poly that you run it. 1 Chimera Flesia. This card's interesting. It's not a great end board piece, but it can be an end board piece in a pinch because of the attack changing. So obviously it's not doing any negatings, but if they can't negate it and you get rid of everything else and they just try and attack over it, I mean, it's a 3,500 and it's going to make them lose 1,000 attack. So it's not terrible. And if you can get it out and also do fusion plays with it, you just get a free add for Super Poly for the crackback, or add instant fusion if you've gone through branded fusion and Fusion Destiny for Ambular Melodies on the crackback. Solid card. Also really good on the crackback after putting Predator counters on stuff. Just comes out, it's a free banish. I mean, what more do you want? Don't need more than one. It's not that useful, but it comes up enough to want. One Trivia Verutum. This guy is a house. You will OTK with him, and you will OTK with him often. You will also Super Poly for him often. He is just that useful. I never had the recursion come up that much, usually because if I've summoned Trivia Verutum and then they've killed him, I'm not really in a position where I can put Predator counters, but it might come up where you just special summon him to go into another Dragon's Dispel or something, or you'll go into the next card we have, Starving Venom Predapower Fusion Dragon. This card never came up until yesterday, and so before yesterday I was seriously thinking about cutting it for Mud Dragon, but then I played against two branded Despia decks. One was a branded Predaplant Despia deck, and Super Polying Mirror Jade and what's it called? The one Masquerade. Super Polying Mirror Jade and Masquerade to make this is just nuts. Like, it's just good. And then if that's the only thing you do, and then because you know Mirror Jade effect is coming out, when this dies, you just get back a Dragon's Dispellier or something. Like, it's just good. I don't think I can cut it now. The negate doesn't come up as often, but it comes up enough. I actually played against this guy who didn't know it was an Omni and just thought it was a monster negate, so he tried to brand it in red, and I just negated it, and he had no more plays, and I killed him that turn. So this card is good enough to keep. You obviously don't want more than one. It's not going to come up enough, but it comes up just enough that you want it. Next we go to the branded cards. 2 Albion, 1 Lubellion, 2 Mirror Jade. The 2 Albion is because sometimes you're going to be in a position where you use Albion as fusion material and banish it, and you want to have a second one to send off Mirror Jade to grab branded banishment. So 2 is good enough. 1 Lubellion, just fine. 2 Mirror Jade. It rarely comes up that you summon the second Mirror Jade, especially if you're using Albion first. But if you go into Lubellion, into Mirror Jade, and then you already have branded banishment in hand, set it, send Albion, set branded fusion, you can go back into Mirror Jade. It came up a couple of times. So 2 Mirror Jade is fine. We're not hurting for the space, so we can play it. DPE, I mean, you need it. That's why we're running Fusion Destiny. That's why we're running the Destiny Heroes. I just want it. And then this is the only suspect choice. Almirage. This should be a Linkaribo, because the only thing you're doing with this is linking Biblisp off into it. Because if you have... excuse me. If you have just Bufalicula or just Triantis and Biblisp in hand and no other Predaplants and no Predapractice or anything, normal Biblisp set link off for Almirage or Linkaribo. Add the other Pendulum monster that you don't have. That gets you into Ambular Melodies, and you have a second monster to sack with the Ambular Melodies to search out Darlingtonia. So it's good enough. You want one card like this so that Biblisp can be a starter. Linkaribo is better because it's a dark, so then you can fuse into stuff like... You can use it as fusion material for Dragon's Dispellier or Chimera Flesia, but that doesn't come up enough for me to feel like it's absolutely necessary out of Linkaribo, and to be honest, I didn't summon this at all yesterday. It never came up, but still good enough. Okay, that is the extra. We'll move into the side. There are some interesting choices in the side. I will talk about them when we get to them, but first off, 3 Nib. This could be Nib, this could be Raigeki. I think Nib is better right now because most people will end on a Spell Trap Negate. You have a lot of Barone running around. You have a lot of what's the one Marincess card, Aqua Argonaut. You have Aqua Argonaut running around. Nibiru can take them out mid combo, which is what you want. And if you can take them out mid combo before they get to anything that might kill it, it gets rid of it. It's a bit harder to play around because you have to notice if they're in a position to summon Apollosa or something. But if you can read it well enough, Nib I think is better than Raigeki right now. Here's the first interesting choice. 3 Contact C. So most people would be running D-Barrier. I don't like to run D-Barrier because in half the matches where you want to play it, Branded Despia, your end board is so many fusions, you do not want to be calling fusions. generally, because you want to be doing D-barrier at the start. Now, the other branded Predaplant player I played against yesterday, he made a good point in that if you're D-barrying and you're stopping them, you don't need your end board. And while I do get that, I have seen enough positions where they've still managed to play through something that I want the board and I want the D-barrier, and so Context C comes into play a lot there. It's just as good against branded Despia. They can't do anything with this on the field. Most of them I've seen don't run like the Dark Charmer or anything. Most of them just run Fusion. So you get this out. It's not a Dark. It's level 6. It's an Insect. They're not doing anything with this card. It does great just as good against branded Despia as D-barrier. It's not quite as good against Sword Soul because obviously it's a 6. They can use the token. They can use the Sword Soul token to fuse into Barone, but it's not a worm, so they can't go into Big Longwan. And going into Barone and not getting so if they normal Moye, make the token, you Contact C, they have to use that Synchro to make Barone, and then they get neither the Chi Shao search or the Moye draw. Which could be enough they only end on like a Barone. Blackout at that point obviously still live because they've got the Moye, but making a Sword Soul player end on just Barone instead of Barone, Chi Shao, Big Longwan, Blackout is good. You want to be doing that. So this is good enough. I like Contact C, and it also has some play against stuff like Salamangreat, against stuff like Marincess. It doesn't stop them, but it convolutes their lines enough that if you can sort of make them go into an unoptimal situation, you can use this and a board to get rid of it, or you can use this and Nibiru to get rid of their plays. There was a position I was in where I had a Contact C against Marincess once, where I prevented him from being able to go into his Marincess plays, and he had to try and go into I think the Water Charmer first before he went into Toad, so he would have gone into Bahamut Shark as the 5th summon. If I'd had Nibiru, I would have been able to crack his board then, and Contact C would have been enough to win the game. It's in just enough play in enough situations that I like Contact C over D-barrier, but this is preference. 2 Lava Golem. It should be 3. I only have 2, but you want this. Against Adventure Dragon Link specifically, Nibiru does not do enough. And by the time you want to use a Nibiru and it does enough, every time they have Barone. So Nibiru does not do enough against their board for me to want to bring a Nibiru, but Lava Golem does. I actually won against the Dragon Link player. Well, actually, I would have won if I hadn't misplayed on the crackback, but I Lava Golemed his Boral end and his Barone. So Lava Golem is good, and you don't need your normal summon. Obviously it's useful, but if you have Practice or you have Buffalicula, you can get around not having your normal summon. And Lava Golem is just great. I don't like Sphere mode because a lot of people don't end on 3 monsters. Marincess, for example, only ends on 2, Argonaut and Toad. But a Kaiju is not enough, I think, in this meta. You want at least 2 of these, and so Lava Golem just sits pretty. Again, you want 3. I'm running 1 Lancia over the 3rd. This obviously does a little bit against Tri-Brigade and a little bit against Flu, which there's some of it at my locals. So 1 Lancia was fine. I would switch this out for a 3rd Golem in a heartbeat. 3 Chalice. This should be Droplet. Again, I'm poor, but this is where you would switch out for Super Poly. If you didn't like Super Poly main deck, you would have the Super Polys here and you'd have the Droplets in the main deck. But it's just good negate, board breaker, damage step shenanigans can come in handy. And then finally, we have 2 Twin Twisters and 1 Red Reboot. I don't run Duster because you need the quick play against Anti-Spell. You have so many spells that Anti-Spell is effectively IO for you, and you can't be running Duster against Anti-Spell. You need to have the Twisters, so I run 2 Twisters instead of 1 and 1. And then Reboot just wins you the game. I played against an Eldritch where he went first, set 4, pass. I summoned Cobra, he's tried Skill Drain, I red rebooted, and I proceeded to OTK him. Like, this card is at 1 for a reason. It's not at 1 for you to be like, 1 is so inconsistent, I'm not playing it in my side deck. It's at 1 because it's so powerful, you should be playing the 1 in every situation. But that does it for the deck profile. Let me show just a quick combo real quick. So if you start with Scorpio and Predaplant, this is what you do. You go Predaplant, summon Scorpio, add Biblisp, pitch Biblisp for the Scorpio, summon Sundew. Biblisp, search out Saraceniant. Then you fuse with these two into Ambulo Melodies. Ambulo Melodies add Predaprime Fusion. And then you have not normaled yet, so you normal Saraceniant. You Ambulo Melodies Saraceniant to summon Cobra. Cobra chain 1, Saraceniant chain 2. Saraceniant adds you Predaplanting. And then Cobra adds you, if you had a Branded Fusion already, you'd add FD. Otherwise, you add Branded Fusion. If they tried to Veiler Cobra, you just Predaprime Fusion. So imagine they did that. We'll just fuse into Dragostapelia. Always put your first endboard fusion monster in the extra monster zone. You don't want Relinquished Anima coming out and breaking your board. That would suck. It doesn't come off often, but it does. Then you would Branded Fusion, pitching Albaz and Snow. And then, banish Albaz. Snow goes to grave. You would get out Albion. And now here's the fun one. If you had not Predaprimed Fusioned yet, let's imagine we hadn't Predaprime Fusioned yet. So we still have Predaprime in hand. You would use the Ambulo and the Albaz to get out Mirror Jade. Because what this lets you do, you get Mirror Jade. And then we would also have Cobra out at this point. Forgive me. So we have not Predaprimed yet. Now you Predaprime Fusion for Dragostapelia with the Albion. And that means at the end of the turn, you get an Albion search. So from here, you set Predaplanting, end phase, Albion, grab, Branded Banishment. So now what you have is you have a Mirror Jade down, you have a Dragostapelia on board, you have a Snow in grave, you have a Predaplanting down. You have 4 interruptions native. If they try and kill something, if they try and kill Mirror Jade or Dragostapelia or something, you have Banishment to special summon, and so you might have a 5th interruption with the Branded Banishment. That was just from Predapractice Scorpio. It works functionally the same if you have Predapractice Chlamydia Sundew. You just fuse with the Biblisp instead of sending it with the Scorpio, but otherwise it still works. So with 2 cards, you end on a board of 4 interruptions and follow-up if they try and crack your board. And if you had started with Branded Fusion or a way to get to Branded Fusion in hand with that combo, you would have a DPE on top of that, so you get the extra interruption and the follow-up with Celestial and Dasher. This deck can be nuts. This deck can produce the craziest boards you've seen off of very little. This deck also bricks. Sometimes you're going to draw a hand. For example, one game yesterday, I drew a hand of Predaplanting, Branded Banishment, Allure of Darkness, and 2 Bufollicula. That's not exactly the hand you want to see. This does not do anything. And sometimes you're just going to have hands that don't do anything. Obviously, you might draw into something with Allure. In my case, I didn't draw into anything with Allure. And so sometimes you might lose to your own deck. That's what we get for choosing Branded Predaplant DPE. We've sacrificed consistency for power. For me, I like that. Took me to an undefeated finish yesterday. But other than that, let me know if anybody actually ends up seeing this. If you like the profile, let me know. I've got some other decks I can do profiles for. My other main deck that I run is Dinomorphia, which is pretty fun. I have an Edison Gladiator Beast deck, which I would be happy to go through. But for now, I'll say the cliche, like and subscribe. This is a very, very small channel. Would love the support. And see you guys next time.